I'm here today with Larry Cohen. Larry needs no introduction. Thank you so much for being here, Larry.
Well, my pleasure, Adam. I hope I can help everyone who's going to listen.
Let me start with, how did you learn bridge?
Well, I was 6 years old, and my grandparents had just learned. It was very popular back then in the 60s, and they needed a third and a fourth. So they taught my brother, they taught me, and that was the foursome.
Wow. And then what was your development like? How did you actually get good?
Well, unfortunately, they moved to Florida the next year. So I only had that 1 year of early development, and I didn't really take it up again until high school and started playing then. And I think I didn't really get quote good until I was about 16, 17. And that's when I realized that I could be pretty good at this. And the biggest thing that was great for me is I was in an area, this was Westchester County, where there were a lot of expert players, Ron Gerard, Marty Bergen. And after the game, we would talk about the deals you just played with experts. I don't think there's anything better than that for developing your skill set. But, it was so different back then, Adam, in the 70s. A lot of younger people played bridge, and people in their 20s and 30s would come home from work and go to the duplicate game. And it was just a big time scene at the local duplicate. And playing then and then talking about the deals was just what you did. And nowadays, most of the duplicate games, the local games I know of are, in the daytime and older people. So it's just that scene is kind of gone.
And how did you and Marty hook up?
Well, Marty was always on my radar. He's such a character, and he was the local star. And at the time, he was playing with someone named Chuck Lamprey, and he would play some with Warren Rosner. And I wasn't in that class, but Marty did befriend me, and we got to talk some. And as I got better, it actually became viable that Marty and I could become partners. So when I was about 20 or so, and Ron Gerard had sort of worn out his welcome with me, it was just a natural to get to become partners with Marty, and that really changed my bridge career. I mean, Marty is an incredible bidding theorist, and I just learned so much from him. It's I mean, there's no substitute for an experience like that. I don't think many players could get in that position. I mean, first of all, I had to be a pretty good player to have someone like Marty Bergen ask me to be his partner. And once that happened, it's just the learning experience is incredible.
Do you think there's any substitute for that high level experience?
Well, we read Bridge World magazine. I'd say that's about as close as it comes. All the expert players certainly grew up reading and learning from Bridge World magazine, which has very high level articles. And when you read these bidding panels, not just in Bridge World magazine, but there's a bunch of them around, even It's Your Call in the Bridge Bulletin, I would say that's the best way to learn about bidding, to read the experts' thoughts about bidding. So, on the expert level, I would say reading those bidding panel answers is about as close as you can come to knowing firsthand and speaking with an expert player.
When we use terms like intermediate, advanced, expert, world class, do you have any sort of rubric or touchstone for how you define those things?
I don't think I would use those terms because I don't think you can really put a label on people. I mean, after one game, you can't analyze how good someone is, even after 1 month. But after 10 years, when you see who's winning a lot, and that's how you know who's better. The luck's going to even out. So I think the way to know who's good is you look at a 10, 20-year period and see who wins all the time. I do think that a very good metric for knowing who the best players are is, believe it or not, a master point metric. And sure, master points don't mean much, they're an attendance record. However, master points won at the nationals, the NABCs. If you look at that list each year of who the player of the year is, who won the most points in national events, and you look at the top 10, those are the best players. So that's a pretty good metric.
So, there's this elite class of 10, 12, whatever it is, people who are just in a different league. And then to me, there's another class right below them of, I wouldn't be surprised if this person won the Vanderbilt, but, they're not Madala. Does that ring true for you?
Definitely. There are some players that just stand out, Mextrup and Rodwell and the generation before them. There's always like those top players. And what they all have in common is they started young. You knew in their 20s that they were the next superstars. You don't see anyone who's 40. How old are you, Adam?
44.
Okay, you don't see anyone who's 44 all of a sudden jump into that level. Sorry, Adam.
No.
We've been down this path before, but it just doesn't happen. So all of these top names, when they were in their 20s, you knew.
Yeah. Which class did you consider yourself in when you were in your heyday?
When I was 20, and I knew I was good, but then when I was in my mid 20s, all of a sudden, I had this breakthrough where I was winning like spin goals and blue ribbon pairs and in the top few every year in the top events. And that list I talked about, points won at national tournaments, I'd be right there. So, but the way I measured myself as a player was not how brilliant I was, but could I sit there for an entire 10-day nationals, which is what we called them back then, and not make a lot of dumb mistakes? I'm sure we all make mistakes, but to just not do anything stupid was the goal. And if I could go through all those days and avoid that, then I felt I was at the top.
Were there some players or pairs that you were just like, I'm never going to be at their level? I can't. They do something I can't do.
No, I didn't ever think that way. And Adam, there's a distinction here between a personal how good am I as opposed to how good is our pair, our partnership. So at the top level, there are superstars like Zia, for example. You don't really Zia is like an individual superstar. As opposed to there was Mextruth and Rodwell and Levin and Weinstein and going back earlier, Hammond and Wolf and Kaplan and Kay and Sontag and Weichsel. And I'm sure I'm going to leave someone out. Sorry. So partnerships, there were some partnerships where I would say to myself, like for example, Mextruth and Rodwell with their 800 pages of notes, I was never going to do that. When I was playing in my heyday with Marty and then with David Berkowitz, I knew I was never going to have that many specific bidding agreements. So in that respect, I knew I wasn't going to get up to that level. On the other hand, I was fine with that because I wasn't going to forget my system either. When we would play in the top levels, like in the final of the spin gold or whatever, world championship events, there were some pairs I'd sit down against and I would respect them as being one of the top 10 pairs in the world, but I would feel like it was a fair fight. I never sat down and said, boy, we're big underdogs against this pair. The level, I mean, the difference between the number 7 pair in the world and the number 9 pair in the world, over one day isn't going to show up.
So you said that your goal was not to make stupid mistakes. Um, how did you do that? How did you go from, oh, I make 2 mistakes a day to I make half a mistake a day?
How did I get to that point? Well, I would take these tournaments extremely seriously. I would make sure to come to the bridge table having not eaten a lot of food, no alcohol, having a good night's sleep. It was crucial to me to get that sleep however I would do it, and it's not easy to fall asleep after bridge, but I was just extremely aware of my physical condition, doing everything possible to come to the table with a clear brain. And just you have to be able to concentrate and focus, and fortunately I was able to do that.
What tricks did you develop over time to fall asleep after a bridge game?
Well, it does take a while to wind down, but my MO after any serious bridge game was the first thing is to go over the deals. That was a must. I would get my partner, and David was my biggest longtime partner, but with Marty as well. After any session, whether it be match points or teams, we would go over every deal. And this was a must. It had to be done. Everything else was of less priority. So we had to go over every deal, and that served two purposes. One is it's great for the partnership. Every partnership should be doing that. But the other thing was it would get it out of my system. I got it out of my head. Okay, board five, I wasn't sure, blah, blah, blah. And we talk about it. And that kind of put it to bed, pardon the pun. But after you go over the deals, it helps get them out of my system. So after that, I was able to maybe read for a while or do something to just try to get bridge out of my brain. And fortunately, I was able to sleep. And worst case, if I couldn't, I'd take a sleeping pill. I had to get that sleep. So, I'm not recommending drugs, but for me, the psychology of a sleeping pill is wonderful because just knowing I have it available would help me sleep at a tournament. And so usually I was able to sleep without it.
Back then, the games didn't end till 11, 11:30, right? So you'd be up pretty late going over the exam.
The late rounds of the spin gold, with especially the screens, would end at 1 o'clock, but it didn't start the next day until 1 o'clock. If you fell asleep at 3 or 4, you could get 7, 8 hours and get up at 11. So there was enough time.
What was your decision like to retire from top level competitive bridge?
Well, I found playing very stressful, not so much in the pair games, but in the team games where I was getting paid and the money got to be pretty good. I felt such an obligation to my sponsor to play well. And not only that, but also at that time, we're talking about 15 years ago, the internet and Bridge Base Online and ViewGraph became bigger and bigger. So all of my plays were more under a microscope, which adds to the pressure, that everyone's going to see what's happening. And I'm very sensitive to, like, I don't want to let anyone down. I don't want to make mistakes. And I just found psychologically that to be stressful and a lot of pressure. And I would go to the tournaments and I wasn't really enjoying it. I enjoyed playing once I was at the table, but in between sessions, I just felt stressed. I just wasn't mentally in a comfortable place. And I was thinking, like, why do I need this stress? Because I was, meantime, developing quite a decent writing and teaching career, which didn't have stress. So I kind of made this decision along with my wife, who helped convince me. Why do it? Why put my body through all that stress when I can make a living writing and teaching? And I'm so glad. I enjoy that much more. And I miss the competition. I play occasionally, but I really, the bottom line is I just found it to be stressful. I didn't enjoy that.
Did you find that stress affected your performance at the table?
Fortunately, not. In fact, if anything, it's ironic that that stress made me play better. I didn't want to let anyone down. I didn't want to make a mistake, that I was like ferocious at the table inside. Do not make a mistake. I really focused hard. And if I instead like went to a club game and couldn't care less, I might make more mistakes because I just didn't put the pressure on myself. I did quit when I was about 50. And let's face it, the older you get, the harder it's going to be to concentrate. So that was in the back of my mind too. Let me get out while the getting is good before I start getting older and forgetting more stuff.
So if I came to you and said, I want to hire you as my coach, Larry, and I know you mostly teach at the intermediate level, but say I came to you and said, I want you to be my coach. I want to put together a regimen, 40 hours a week. How much would you have me focusing on bridge versus concentration, whatever the non bridge mental aspects are? Let's start there.
Well, I would think the best thing I could do for you is kibitz with a notepad, watch you play. And after the session, dissect every single bid and play. So I would think that would be the best thing I could do, is have you play and just ask you, talk afterwards. As to before the game, I mean, I would look at your bidding system. I'm not a big bidding system guy, but I would probably tear up half of it and keep it very simple and say, don't play this, because that to me ruins most people, is they play too much stuff and their heads full of trying to remember system, and that's going to ruin your concentration. So before the session, I would just like tear up half your notes, and so that you could have a clear head.
You and David, I know, played precision. What did your system notes look like? How long were they?
Our notes were about 80 pages, and my goal every year was to take out pages, not to add pages. And I wanted to know those 80 pages inside and out. And that was one of the biggest reasons for our success, was we didn't have an 800-page system. Sure, could we have maybe used some science on one deal every 100 that we didn't have available? Yes. But the trade-off for that was much better, in that we didn't have a lot of misunderstandings. We just didn't screw up the system. We knew those 80 pages. And I'm remembering the great Dick Freeman had a quote, and I love this quote. He said, "The 90% system that you remember 100% is much better than a 100% system that you remember 90%." And that's kind of my motto, is don't look for the perfect notes and the perfect system, but have just the basics and remember them. And let me say, Adam, that Marty wanted to add stuff after every session. Marty would say, well, on board 6 we could have done this, and let's invert the meaning, and let's add this, let's add this, let's add this. I want to subtract. And David was very accommodating to me. I controlled the notes, and I would be the one who would just keep it simple. So that's one thing I would do, Adam, is I would look at your system notes, and not just for you, but I think everyone plays too much stuff, and I just would cut everyone in half.
Did you find that with Marty that opposites attract thing worked, or was that ultimately what doomed the partnership?
I think it doomed the partnership. Now, opposites attract is an interesting question, because one thing we were opposite in is Marty was a wild preemptor and very aggressive, and I was not. But that's fine in a partnership, as long as you know. Okay, I knew when Marty opened 2 hearts that he didn't have ace king jack 10 9 6. He might have 5 little. So the fact that he would preempt, be very aggressive, and I wasn't, that's not a problem in a partnership. But it is a problem when one partner wants to play a lot of system and the other doesn't. That's not compatible. And with David, we both were happy to have very little system. And I don't think opposites there is a good idea at all.
I remember David told me when the two of you started playing, the first or one of the early conversations was all about style. If you open 3 spades vulnerable in first seat, what's it going to look like? Do you think that's the most important thing for a partnership?
Definitely. Never mind your spiral relay responses. You have to know your partner's style and what they'll open with, what their 2/1 game force looks like. And that was the biggest advantage I found, playing with David regularly for almost 20 years, is you get to know your partner's style. And that's a huge advantage, because in your bidding judgment, you know roughly the parameters of what they might have.
How did you and David get to know each other and start playing?
Well, like everyone knows everyone in the bridge world, you know how it
Yeah,
is. So,
yeah.
we're on each other's radar, and we actually worked together. So many bridge players back then in the 80s worked at the American Stock Exchange. So I worked with David. I actually worked for David. And when I was kind of a little tired of playing with Marty. And I don't mean to knock Marty. I mean, Marty is, in my opinion, maybe the most brilliant bidding theorist ever, but it just wasn't working partnership wise. So I was in the market for a new partner, and David was in the market for a new partner. And that's how the timing's just right. I guess it's a lot like a relationship, when you find your soulmate in life, you just have to be there at the right time.
And like a relationship, like how much work do you feel like you need to put into maintaining a partnership over 20 years?
Well, there's 2 elements to it. One is the technical work, like going over the deals, as I said, is extremely important. And we both agreed to do that. We would go over the deals after the session. Nothing was more important than that. And the other technical part was just having our system and our agreements, and not just bidding, but defense as well. I can't stress enough how important defense was. But then there was the other element, the social aspect of it. And just like a husband and wife can get on each other's nerves, or you have to work on, little annoying habits. Same thing with bridge partners. You can get on each other's nerves very easily. I remember with Marty, we had our system notes, and then we also had our cohabitation notes. We would, back then, when you were in your 20s, you shared a room with your partner. I can't imagine sharing a room now with a grown adult, but I shared a room with Marty, and we had notes on how to share the room. Like, don't make this noise, don't turn on the air conditioning too high, don't leave your thing in the towel in the bathroom. So we had cohabitation notes and we had bridge notes. So you have to work on those things.
Wow, I can't imagine.
I wonder if I could dig up those notes. They'd probably be pretty embarrassing.
Do you consider yourself a competitive person?
Very, extremely. And I miss that part of it. Now I can just try to beat Mike Becker and David Berkowitz on the golf course, but I do miss the competition. And that's why I do dabble. I do play from time to time because I'm so competitive. I don't want to lose. I don't want to make a mistake. And that's what drove me.
Do you feel like you were driven more by loving to win or hating to lose?
Hating to lose. I mean, winning is fun, but it doesn't last long. That's the thing. When I win a national championship, it feels great, but it only lasts like a day or two. The next day, congratulations. That's nice, but a day or two later, it doesn't matter anymore. Whereas losing, really, you remember the losing more. I hate to lose.
Let's say you lose the finals of the Vanderbilt. How long does that haunt you?
Well, it depends. Losing by 50 isn't that bad. It's the loss where I feel I could have prevented it. The close losses where I could have done something different to affect the outcome. Those are the ones that really hurt.
Yeah. So you teach mostly intermediates these days. Is that
Yeah, that's what I do. That's what we call it with quotes intermediate, which basically
yeah.
means not a beginner and not someone who's going to try to win national championships. So it's a very wide level, but it's the level I love. That's to me the most fun level in bridge, is to be kind of get through the beginner stuff where you have to memorize what one note trump means and get to that level where you can learn and improve. And that's to me the most beautiful part of bridge, is learning for the first time, to throw them in for a rough and slough. Learning these little fun things that are how to guess a queen, or to say, oh, he opened one spade and has already shown up with this. Start learning what's in the other people's hands, getting beyond what's just in your. There's so much to the game at that level, and I love that level.
What are some of the most common mistakes you see at that level?
You see it all. You see all the mistakes. So really, it comes down to what I always say. It's just constant. It's just loss of concentration. There's no one mistake. There's just too many mistakes that you can make. And when you're at that learning level, you're going to make tons of mistakes. Mistakes in the bidding, mistakes in the opening lead, the declare play, the defense. There's tons of them, but a lot of them are just failure to concentrate. And the other mistake is a lot of people at that level, they have a hole in their education. In other words, they didn't come through the learning ranks properly, and they missed like some basics in bidding. And I find there's a lot of students, they've been playing 5 years, yet they couldn't tell me the difference between openers reverse or openers jump shift. They just couldn't explain that. For anyone who's watching this, if you've been playing 3 years and you can't answer, if you can't tell me what's the difference between a reverse or a jump shift, then you need to review that and study that. And it's unfortunately a little tedious and boring, but you do have to know all the, I would say openers rebid is openers second bid is the area that everyone needs to make sure you know what all of openers rebids mean. Otherwise, there's just a gap in your education.
A lot of people get to that intermediate level and never advance beyond it. What do you think holds them back?
Well, I can't say this so much for my students because they're there to learn, but most people are out there just playing. They're not trying to learn. They don't take lessons. They don't read books. So I'd say 95% of ACBL, they just play. And I have sympathy for that. It's fun to play. It's work to take lessons. It's work to read. Playing is fun. So they just want to play, 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 but they're not going to get very good at it just by playing.
Even the ones who are taking our lessons and reading the books and stuff, like, how often do you see someone who starts with you like, okay, I need to learn openers rebids, and gets to the point where they're like making day two of an open national event?
Well, that's tough. I mean, because almost all of our students are, in their 70s and 80s. So players who take up the game in their retirement, it's almost impossible to get really good at it. So that doesn't happen very often, Adam. My students, I want them to get better, but there's realistically a ceiling. They're not going to win a national event. It's just not possible. But I would love to see them get from here to here. That they can do. And when you take up something in your 70s, let's face it, it's just hard to become an expert at anything you take up. I wish I had learned golf at a younger age. I know there's a ceiling for me. So, with my students, their ceiling is not to win the world championship, but I love it when they get better, and they all can get better.
Do you find a commonality between the ones who do manage to get significantly better? Is there something they're doing that's different?
Yeah, well, most of them have a mathematical kind of background. The ones I can think of are math people, science people, as opposed to more arts people. But the biggest thing I notice is focus. When I teach, even when I'm giving a lecture and I look around the room, I can see who's focused. I'm up there, and invariably someone comes in late, and I'm looking at my students, and the ones who are watching Joe saunter into the room, those are the ones who aren't gonna do well at bridge. They're kind of playing bridge, and they're okay. They've got their food, and they're distracted, and they're not going to do well. So yeah, it's focus. All of my students who do well, they focus.
I have a lot of students who struggle with counting and hand visualization. I know that's a common thing. Do you have exercises or anything like that that you recommend to your students on that?
I do stress counting at least the trump suit and then trying to be aware of what's the key suit. Like, look at the diamonds there. You have ace, king, fifth, and dummy, and too little in your hand. And you're going to probably try to set up those diamonds. So you better count those diamonds. And how to count is something I stress a lot. And so I would try to go in baby steps. So make sure you can count the trump suit, and maybe there's one other suit. But as far as counting out a full deal, that takes years, and most people can't do that.
You said you focus on how to count. What do you mean by that?
I'm so glad you asked, because this is something I stress every cruise I do, every lesson I do is not 1, 2, 3, 4. So, in other words, let's say you're about to draw a trump and you have in your hand five headed by the ace king, and dummy has three little. What most people do is they'll lay down the ace and they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then they'll play the king 5, 6. Oh, get rid of that completely. So, what I like to tell my students is okay, you have ace, king, fifth, opposite three little. You've got eight of them. And then I say, how many do your opponents have? Five, right? Well, watch those five. Just watch the five. So, when you lay down the ace and king, if everyone follows suit on the ace and king, then you know they were 3-2. And you have to start thinking in terms of how did the suit break, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I always teach when you work on any suit is just watch how they break. Don't go 1, 2, 3, 4. You do that too, Adam? Now you will.
Yes, yes. Counting to five is much easier than counting to 13. And thinking in the patterns. Yeah.
Then it's not only do you know the trumps are out, but then oh, they were 3-2, and that's the building block for the rest, counting
Yes.
even more suits.
Yeah. Paying attention and noticing spot cards is another one that a lot of people struggle with. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Well, that's more of like an advanced slash expert topic. That's difficult for intermediate whatever that means. Players are going to struggle with that. And unless you're really, really focused and concentrating, that's pretty difficult. For players who haven't played 10,000 deals, it's just not possible or practical to count everything and watch all the spots and what was the lead, what was the bidding, what your brain will explode. So I'm practical here. I don't expect my students to know at trick 11 that the 4 is high.
Was that something as a player that just came naturally to you, or that you had to work on the spot cards?
That takes work. It's still to this day. There was never a point that it became easy. It requires intense concentration, no matter how long I've played the game. And frankly, that's what I would worry about the most. I'm hoping to play next month in the senior trials, and people say, "Do you get rusty?" Well, not so much in the bidding because that's kind of like riding a bicycle. But I know I'm going to have to work really hard when I sit down, especially since it's going to be with computers, and I'm not used to that. I have very little experience with that. I know it's going to be an effort for me to watch those spot cards and to really keep track of them, and it's going to require a lot of concentration. The most important thing is, and this comes with experience, is to know which suit you're going to have to really look at, because to memorize all 52 cards, that's I don't I frankly don't do that. Like, but I'll know at trick one, okay, clubs. Look at that's the suit I better watch the spot cards in. So with experience, I can know which suit I'm going to have to focus on. So it's not like I'm memorizing all 52 cards. It's more like, well, these are the 13 I better focus on. But other than that, I don't have any memory trick.
When you were playing professional at the top levels, what kind of work did you do to stay sharp between tournaments?
Well, not too much, frankly. I would always study in my notes. About 2 weeks before the tournament, I would go talk to David about our notes, make sure we're up to date, and then we would both study them on the airplane. And then when we got to the tournament, we would review what we found. I would always like find a few things, and we'd get together and talk about the notes. And I'd sometimes prepare a little quiz or reminders for David. But that was about all. We'd do a little practice, but we weren't fanatical about it.
How serious a golfer would you consider yourself to be?
Well, I love golf, and I usually shoot in the mid 80s, high 80s. That's why I moved to Florida 30 years ago, is to play golf a lot between bridge.
How much time do you spend playing versus practicing on the putting green and the driving range?
Yeah, well, I can play 18 holes pretty much every day, but if I then practice and hit balls, my back would give out. So I would love to practice more, but I physically can't. So I'm aware that I have a ceiling in golf. A, I took it up as an adult, so that already limited me. And B, I don't have the physicality to practice. So I know that I'm never going to be a scratch golfer. Maybe once a year I'll break 80. And I'm happy with that. I accept that. I know I'm going to make mistakes at golf. Every shot I make is imperfect. So that's the beauty of golf for me is I'm not a professional. I know I'm not that good, and I accept that and I enjoy it. And that's the difference between golf and at bridge. I don't accept mistakes. At golf, I'm content.
What do you think the bridge analog is? Like, if I want to go crazy working at it, well, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Well, you can, and Adam, you and I've talked about this, and I'm sorry to be your detractor. I love what you're doing. You can knock yourself out and study. How many hours a night do you sleep, Adam? 8, 7?
Yeah, eight or
All right.
nine.
All right, so let's give you 15 hours. Let's say you have to eat and brush your teeth or something. Let's give you 14 hours a day, 365 days a year. I'm sure you'll improve, but if you're, say, now the number 150 player in the country, which would be quite good, is that an okay guess that maybe you are?
Sure. Yeah.
You can't get to number 5. It just can't happen. It
Yeah.
just won't happen.
Yeah, and I am very realistic about that. But to get to number 50,
Maybe,
um,
maybe.
maybe, right? Like that would be I would be very happy. with that. Like that's like shooting 80 for me.
Well, even better than that. I mean, I would think the number
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
150, yeah, the number 150 bridge player in the country would be shooting 70 at golf. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
well, to make that analogy though, I mean, it's so great for golf. The 150 golfer in the world right now, whom maybe you've heard of, and let's say he's 35 years old, he's not never going to become a top 10. It's just not going to happen
Yeah.
at this point. But yeah,
Yeah.
maybe he can become number 50. So yeah, to get to from 150 to 50 maybe is possible. And I do hope you go from 150 to 50. I hope you prove me wrong and start winning the spin gold every year. But good
Yeah.
luck.
No, I mean, I know I'm never going to be at the level you were, and probably, I mean, I would be very happy to be at the level you'll be in 10 years. But yeah, like right now, if I won the spin gold, everyone would be shocked. Greg and I were third in the platinum pairs a couple years ago, and that's my best result by far.
Wonderful result. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and everyone was like, "Wow, you guys, that's a really good result for you." And I would like to be at the point where people were like, "Yeah, that's a good result, but I'm not surprised." Like Adam is third in the platinum pairs. Like, yeah, I believe that
You have to be able to play to do that. That's not, there's luck involved in these events.
for sure.
However, that's a certain, I to be able to do that says something. That's very impressive.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that day, everything felt easy. I didn't feel like I was grinding or struggling. It was just things came like I felt in the zone.
Yeah, that's the way it goes when you do well. That is how it feels. Things just are working well.
Yeah, I don't know how to get back into that zone more often.
Well, some of it's the luck of the deals. It's just the deals come up the right way for you. And of course, we need gifts and you need the cards to just 1 year away that fits your bidding, fits your comfort zone.
You and David had a remarkable record in ACBL pair games. Do you think people would sit down against you and be like, you know, I rate to get a 20% if I just play my game against these guys, so I'm going to be wild?
Well, I think there's a slight edge that the top pairs have in that players against them might kind of fall apart a little or be nervous or uncomfortable. But, in the blue ribbon pairs, most of the people we play against are seasoned veterans. They're not going to be like in awe of us or play poorly because they're used to playing against top players. But yeah, if I go to the local duplicate, people are going to like get nervous and make mistakes against me. When I'm at teaching and sometimes I'll sit down and play a deal against my students, they like fall out, they just can't. It would be like if I went to the first tee and Tiger Woods was in front of me, I might miss the ball. So yeah, people do get nervous against me, but not at the top level.
I'm sure you would agree you're not at the level that you were when you retired. Do you think that's more a matter of aging or more a matter of not playing at the high levels for 10, 15 years?
Yeah, well, I hardly ever play, and I think that's going to be a slight disadvantage. But I think it's a lot like riding a bicycle. It's not like I'm going to play once a year and forget what's Trump. So yeah, it's a slight disadvantage that I'm rusty and haven't played much, and it's a slight disadvantage that I'm going to be 66 instead of 26. Um, if I was playing at a level of 9.9 20 years ago, I might be now at a level of 9.85. I don't think it matters that much because I'm constantly involved in the game. I'm reading all the time, I'm teaching all the time. And granted, it's a different level. From teaching, I learn a lot. I learn how my students are thinking, I learn how to explain things. I'm constantly involved in bridge. So I think that just keeps me sharp.
Yeah, I feel the same way with my teaching. Well, thank you.
Well, good luck with your quest, and also good luck helping the people who are trying to get better, which is really noble of you.
Yeah, so much of what I want to do is not just for me, but for my students and your students, and what it really looks like to put a full effort in, and what the best way to use that limited amount of time that we have to devote to bridge.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.